moderating your podcast, which is, everybody seems to have pointed out so far, is somewhat ironic that I'm moderating because I don't promote mine all that much. I use community instead. So this will be a learning experience both for me and hopefully for you all, at least to an extent. But podcasting obviously has grown and grown and grown recently. The question is, with all the ones that are out there, how do you separate yours out and make it the one that people find, let alone get interested in the first place? If they can't find it, it's not being promoted well, it's not going to matter what your content is. Nobody's going to know that it exists. So with that being said, let's start down here at the end and just kind of work our way this way with introductions, starting with podcasting is Rich Sigford.
Yes, hello, I'm Rich Sigfred, known throughout the podosphere and the internet as podcasting is Rich Sigfred. I'm a content creator as well as a distributor. There are quite a few shows that I personally don't do. I have nothing to do with the creative side, but I'll distribute the shows for the people so that way they don't have to worry about the tech behind it. I've got the dubious distinction of being the first fan caster with Recommend the Outcast. I've also done the very first podcast dedicated to an independent wrestling show for a federation I used to work for. Also, the very first comic book released in podcast form. Been mentioned in Podcasting for Dummies. I was around before podcasting, much like Nathan P. Butler down there. And I lend my voices to quite a few various podcasts. Good finish. I mentioned that I was also listening to Podcasting for Dummies.
His appropriate name.
I'm Stuart Gaffey. I'm the co-host of the Eclectic Review podcast, which I do with my wife. Our tagline, which you love, where science fiction collide.
Where science and science fiction collide.
Yes.
I love that.
My wife is a biologist, so she's the science end, and I write science fiction, fantasy, such as a short story that is in Writers for Relief 2, which you can help read good stories and help those people who are still suffering from Hurricane Katrina. Goes to the food bank for them. So,
yeah, Volume 3 is going to be coming out soon.
My name is Stephen Ewan Cobb. I'm the host of the Future You podcast. I've been doing it for about 3 years, and the focus is the future. I interview people for their opinion about the future. Science fiction writers, scientists, futurists, and even Nathan has agreed to an interview at some future date.
I'm Gail Martin. I write the Chronicles of the Necromancer, the Silver Blood King, Darkhaven, and I do the Ghost in the Machine fantasy podcast. I've been doing that for about 1.5 years now, where I have other authors, paranormal experts, people of interest to the con-goer and reader on the show. We have a conversation we let other people eavesdrop on. For me, it's a way to provide good content and also cross-market with other authors, introducing their readers to my work and my readers to their work. So it's a win-win situation, and also just present some information that folks who like to read in the genre and come to cons enjoy learning about. So I may be in it a little differently, at a little different level and a little different goal than some of the other folks on the panel, but it's all podcasting.
And I am your moderator, this time Nathan P. Butler, in regards to the topic of this panel. I run StarWarsFanWorks.com, which is the home of Star Wars fan audio online. It's a combination of audio dramas, podcasts, basically anything audio drawn together into one website for that particular genre. I have a podcast novel or a podio book out there called Echoes, and I've hosted podcasts since before the term existed, back when they were just called internet radio shows or MP3 radio shows back in 2002. And that's actually where I'd like to begin, is in my case, I got into podcasting even kind of before the name existed, and it was just to get information out to help promote a Star Wars chronology I was doing. I had been a guest on another radio show, I guess you'd call it, digital on radio, so I got interested in that. And afterwards is when it built up into the community, and then podcasting started to become so big. So I guess the first thing is, both in terms of promotion and in terms of what got you into this, obviously something brought the idea of podcasting to your attention. So it was some promotional vehicle someone else used that got your attention and made you so interested that you then got into it yourself. So what if anything, was what inspired you or what you saw that made you realize this is a good idea to get you into podcasting in the first place?
I think
And just down the line.
Okay.
I think I became aware of podcasting from actually the nonfiction side of my life, which is very involved with marketing. I run a marketing company, and so I work with folks in a variety of media. And I became aware of what was happening with Blog Talk Radio and then internet audio from the nonfiction side, then realized how many people were using it in fiction, got to meet a lot of folks in the podcasting community when I started coming to cons as an author, and said, you know, this sounds like something that I would enjoy doing. My first paid job was as a night shift DJ, so I wasn't afraid of equipment or recording. And it became, for me, like I said, a good way to cross-market with other authors and put some interesting information out there. So that's how I found it.
Rich and Murr and Lafferty and T. Morris encouraged me for a couple of years, about a year or so, to do a podcast, to promote my science fiction. I've written a couple of novels. And I didn't know what to do a show on. And I finally settled on the future rather than science fiction because there were so many about science fiction that I didn't feel I could contribute anything. And so once I settled on a nonfiction topic of speaking about the future specifically, then I was able to do a show with enthusiasm and passion. And in my first, I guess about 27 episodes, I read 15 minutes of one of my novels into the show, so that it was like serialized. So it was for promotion, but the show has really kind of taken on its own life since then. And I've been doing it for 3 years, and it's now strictly nonfiction, so to speak, about the future.
I got into it, I was a guest at the first RavenCon, and T. Morris was there talking about podcasting, and I sat in on it and on his thing, and it seemed really interesting, and I thought, well, I'll go home. I thought I would do it like an audio drama type thing, and use it to promote my own writing. And so as I was getting into it, getting ready, and starting writing scripts, and telling my wife about it, and she basically said, I want to do it too. And so then I started thinking, okay, how can we do this together? And it came up with this idea of the Eclectic Review, and basically, I didn't even say that when I was introducing myself. The show basically it was a half hour long, and for the first half, we talk about something usually science or art related, and try and come out from our different angles and perspective. And then we review everything that you could possibly think of. And it turned into, it does both purposes. It still promotes me and still gets people going to my website and seeing what I've done. But it also turned into a chance once a week that my wife and I can sit down and have a conversation about something that's actually intelligent as opposed to bills or children or anything else that consumes our lives. It's therapeutic.
And the question is how we got into the podcast?
How you got into it, or was there anything that you saw that got you interested in the first place? Since we're talking about the promotion side, what did you see that got you interested in the first place?
Right, well, first off, keep in mind, podcasting isn't necessarily an art form, it's just a distribution method. So Nathan and I, we were doing just audio that we just put on the internet, before podcasting went around. But because what got me into podcasting was curiosity, finding a way to distribute my show to audiences quicker and easier. Because at the time, StarWarsFanWorks.com, the home, Star Wars Internet Fan Audio, was first created. It was a centralized location where people could go for that specific genre or that specific style of entertainment. So I wondered if there was some way, instead of people remembering to show up once a month for my shows, we're constantly going there to see all the other shows and stuff, and then hopefully, they'll notice the news post when my stuff's out. There had to be some way to get it out to them more directly. And I was thinking, with news feeds out there's got to be something similar to that. So I started doing a little bit of research, and I'd heard the term podcast thanks to Michael Nevo's Dragon Page way back in the day. And I was like, wait a second, okay, so this is how they're doing it. There's got to be some way that I can do it. It can't be that hard, because it's got to be something that's very user-friendly. So I kind of figured out how to do it and started releasing it that way. And actually, went from about 100 listeners to 500 just by, because I started doing it right about the time that iTunes came out with podcast support, and all of a sudden, like, boom, people were able to find it easier, and all of a sudden, you know, all these downloads. What originally got me into doing audio actually was, I was a hardcore Star Wars fan, and I went to theforce.net on a regular basis, and I saw a news post for episode X of Chrono Radio, and I was thinking, wow, that must be pretty extreme. It's got an X.
That'd be 10, Rich.
Oh, is it 10? Oh, is that when Chrono Radio went muzzle?
The X.
Is it the X? Malcolm? Anyway. But I saw that, and I was thinking, oh, well, hey, here's some audio, something I can listen to while I'm at work, because, you know, I was bored. And I listened to the show, and I was like, hey, this actually isn't that bad. And then I found like Digital Llama, and then you sponsored a contest for coming up with creative commercials. Whoever got a funny creative audio bit would get an interview on the show. And I was like, well, I'm already a fan of the show. What the hell? You know, I've always wanted to get into radio. There's no money in radio, but I could just play around, goof around, see what I could do. And I did it, I won. You and I developed a friendship at that point in time while we were talking about how we were going to, you know, the tech behind actually doing the interview and whatnot. And then I realized that, wait a second, this really isn't as difficult as I thought. You know, I make the joke after, you know, talking to you, I figured, I can do that.
Exactly.
But that is a comedic way of saying that, wait a second, I can do that. You know, and I always say on podcasting panels that anymore with the technology, the ability to do it, it is so easy to do it that the only thing that's holding you back is your own apathy or laziness. And that was me kind of overcoming that, realizing like, wait a second, so I could actually live my dream of being a voice actor, of having my own show, entertaining people, and all I have to do is just actually get off my ass and do it. All right.
And I'll add another piece there that, you know, I wanted to be an author for many, many years. And so one of the really cool realizations that set in when I started to have books published was, wow, now that I'm a published author, maybe I can like talk to other published authors and they'll like return my emails. So there is still this little part of wonderment in the back of my head that says, wow, if I can get other authors on my podcast and get to talk to them, this is kind of cool. And so, you know, kind of sharing from that sense of wonder of, hey, wow, we get to talk about neat stuff.
Now, Rich and I both, and he was just kind of describing, we came to it from a community perspective. For me, it was the fan film community drew me into Digital Llama Radio, which got me interested in making my own show. Theirs was about fan films mostly, which caused me to eventually create Star Wars Fanworks, which is the community where Rich, you know, found the Star Wars fanatic and got into it. So for us, at least the starting point was a community. Are there any other podcasting communities that you all belong to use for cross-promotion? Like if people were wanting to find a place to get the word out that you think are particularly good communities to be in?
Well, you know, there was Podcast Alley, Podcast Pickle, Podbean, all of these other places. There are networks that will specifically play promos. Honestly, nowadays it's all word of mouth because the communities have kind of, you actually see a cyber tumbleweed go through most of those because what ended up happening was you get the same problem that you normally have with regular forums, where you know some of the better comments that you might get on your show that are nicer would be something like "first" or "this is gay." So unfortunately, the community just really started to break down, and now, like I said, it's predominantly word of mouth. We did have communities like the Sci-Fi Podcast Network, which was started by Michael A. Stapple, and I think he wanted it to go a different direction than it did. And there are some people that think that to get into a certain community, you've got to know the right people. And to a certain degree, that's true, because there are still networks that exist out there where they just try to have like-minded shows. So that way, you know, like with the Sci-Fi Podcast Network, if you want to find just science fiction, you go to that website, you get just science fiction. The exact same thing with Star Wars Fanworks.
Any other communities you all?
Twitter! Mention Twitter!
Well, that's social networking.
That's social networking there, Indiana. Where's your hat?
But no, I you know, when I started out, actually Podcast Pickle back then was an excellent resource because everybody was just starting out and everybody was like supportive and if you had a technical question, the answer, somebody would answer it. And then I stopped going because it became what you were describing, and the same thing with Podcast Alley. And plus the numbers of people doing it. I mean, we just celebrated our 3rd year doing the show, and 3,000.
Seriously, that's like 1,700 years in
Podcasting years.
odd years. You're an old timer now.
But way back when, in the good old days, there weren't that many people doing it, relatively speaking. There were only 20,000 instead of 200,000. So you actually could get to know, and I still have friendships from people who I've never even met in person. We just listen to each other's shows, we help each other out. But now there's so many shows out there that the competition is really, it's difficult. Nobody wants to help anybody.
Well, and it's funny. It's funny you mention competition, because when everybody first started, there was the argument that it's not really competition, where nobody's going up against each other, so it was very friendly. But what we're starting to find out with so many podcasts, there actually directly is competition, because you're fighting for people's time. Some people may only have 15 minutes a day to listen to a podcast while they're commuting. Not everybody's like me, who subscribe to 300 podcasts, have 8 hours a day at work, plus 30-minute commute back and forth to listen to it. Or I personally find not much good on television anymore, so I'd rather watch independently created stuff because it's cooler. So it's there is a little bit of competition. Most of us have a friendly competition with each other, but there are some people that they forgot that this is just a fun hobby, and they're still trying to figure out how to make that $1 million in podcasting. And so for some people it's cutthroat. I don't look at it that way. And I sleep fine at night knowing that, like, hey, look, if I have a bunch of listeners, great. Because I think last I heard was that if you have over 250 subscribers or downloads per episode, then you are in the top 5% of podcasts. Which, I don't know how many. Yeah, exactly.
Really?
Well, exactly. And
I wasn't
even
even
though,
about 5% in high school.
and even though the podosphere is expanding with so many people creating content and whatnot, a lot of the good stuff is starting to stand out amongst all the noise.
And I came into this from a different perspective, which was that non-genre perspective. And one of the people that I think really influenced me was a guy named Alex Mondosian. He's an internet marketing guru, and I actually saw what he was doing from a marketing perspective, does a lot of teleseminars, teaches how to do teleseminars and online marketing, and thought, well, that's really cool. He's utilizing web audio and web video in some ways I didn't know you could do it. Found some tools that were very user-friendly and said, this is less about me trying to produce a competitive radio show that is vying for ratings, if you will, as it is for me as an author to be communicating with a voice to people who like to read what I write and like to read similar things to what I write. And one of the cool side effects from getting to know other authors is to be able to pass along and say, hey, I know that you read 200 books a year. I'm really grateful that my book is one of those 200, but what are you going to do with the other 199? Well, I have some friends who write some neat stuff, and I think they're pretty good. I'd like to introduce you to them. Spend 15 minutes with us. We're not going to talk about our books and why you ought to buy our books. We're going to talk about something cool, like ghosts or vampires or werewolves or something related to what we write, and you can decide at the end of it whether you want to look us up. Then I post that on my media, my Facebook, my website. I send them the link, I put it on iTunes, I put it on YouTube if it's video. They send it out to all of their readers and their fans. I put it out for my folks. We've just introduced each other, if you will, to all of our collective live and virtual friends. And so I'm in it for a little different thing than even being in the top 250 subscribers. For me, it's a constant, hey, I want you to meet a friend of mine.
So, and actually
creating a community as opposed to being part of one at the beginning.
And that's what I was actually going to spin the original question, which was, what communities do you belong to promote your podcast? You actually don't need to really be a part of any community. You can create your own. That's the forums, like Jim said, the social networking, whether it's MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, whatever the next one is that's going to come out in 5 minutes. All of these things, you can develop a community because you can develop a rapport. That's one of the reasons why podcasting is one of the coolest mediums, is because a movie star, television star, they don't have the same connection that we do. A lot of us, no matter what the subject matter, we may take 5-10 minutes, either at the start of the show, at the end of the show, or even sometimes just in the show notes talking about what's going on in our personal lives, usually why we haven't released an episode on time. And so the audience is able to have a personal connection, almost an intimate connection with you, because it's like, well, they're talking to me. Because most people, they're just, they've got their headphones in or they're listening on the computer or whatever, and what they're doing is you're setting up an environment where you're either talking directly to that person, or they're sitting across the table from a group of friends talking, around. They may not have as loud of a voice because, you can't hear them. But unless they do take part in some of the online stuff like forums, social networking and whatnot.
Well, and also in that same vein, depending on the format of your show, with our show, we get listener mail all the time, and we take it into account and have actually altered the format of our show in some cases. We'll try something new. We tried something at one point, and just everybody hated it. And it stopped. It existed for like 2 episodes, and then we were just like, okay, we won't. And so that was purely the fans, the listeners, their viewpoint on our show changed what the show was going to be.
Rich, you basically relaunched Regularly the Outcast at one point.
We're on version 4 now.
Just from fan feedback. One thing I want to mention is they talked about teaching others or helping others out. When you're in a community, you do have that closer connection because you have people who are helping each other out and such. What I'm starting to see, and I guess maybe it's only starting to really happen in the fan audio stuff because it started so much earlier, is I'm seeing more of a generational change. A lot of us who started doing the fandom audio are now moving on to other non-fandom things, or general sci-fi or audio books and such. And it's kind of been handed off. For years, I was putting out tons of Star Wars audio dramas and radio show episodes all over the place. Now I do one every now and then, and now the greats in the genre are actually sitting in this room. I'm going to point them out and embarrass them, but the greats in the genre are these 4 sitting back here. It's Indiana Jim Perry with his amazing codename Starkeeper.
Woo! Thank you.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah. you got Joe Harris, producer extraordinaire for Lion's Mouth Entertainment. You got Sarah and Andrew Gilbert, some of the most talented voice actors in the genre at the moment. It's an amazing community, but it's like a generational shift. We go from the lead to then being a patron for others, and that's what I was wondering is, at this point, if you've been in podcasting long enough, I'm not sure if podcasting itself has been around long enough, do you find yourself having been experienced enough that now you're sort of becoming the patron to others, where you're helping promote them more so than even promoting yourself now?
I would say, with my Ghost in the Machine podcast, I was looking around to say, how could I introduce other people to my series and to me as a new name and a new author? And when I created the podcast, now I see that I'm working with a lot of authors. We're all trying to say, hey, walk into the store, there are a lot of authors on the shelf. How do you get somebody to pause in front of your book long enough to say, I think I'll even pick it up and read the back, wow, this looks good. And there's so much noise out there for authors that now I find that by inviting author friends and other friends of interest on the show, and saying, talk about your project, it becomes an opportunity for us to help each other to say, I find this cool, maybe you'll find it cool too, but it's a collaborative, helping each other out thing as much as it is promotion.
Gail actually promoted my show, even though my show's older than hers. She had me on her show as a guest. So it's actually sometimes it's kind of lopsided and irregular, but yeah.
So it's more peers than it is a mentor-mentee type thing at this point in podcasting.
Yeah, I've been on Rich's show, and I think I've had you on my show yet.
No, you haven't.
And maybe I should commit to getting an interview.
We've talked about it a lot, but we always end up just We're missing each other,
Yeah,
especially at cons.
Yeah, I'm getting Nathan next. But yeah, there is a
That's why
lot
I'm
of,
sitting down here.
there is a lot of sort of cross-fertilization, and the community to me is, and this is the thing that I'm most interested in saying in this room for this promotion thing. I've tried promoting my podcast in many different ways, but the best results that I've gotten is by either interviewing or being interviewed by another podcaster. Because then their audience and my audience, so we sort of merge a little bit, and the people who would be interested in my show as well as theirs can then start listening to my show as well. And so when I kind of monitor the blips of where the downloads go up and down, that's the best results I've had. Either being on somebody's show or having a podcaster on my show.
In the same vein, something that I used to do a lot of, and I still do now, is just doing taglines for other shows, saying, hi, this is Stuart Jaffe from the Eclectic Review, and you're about to listen to Future and You. And other podcasters love that because it's 5 seconds that they don't have to come up with material for. But
It's a nice panel.
But it's a nice little panel. It is, and it's amazing. And I've done that, and then I have one of our listeners started her own podcast doing Buffy fanfic, and she asked, and she asked me, she said, I like your voice, would you be willing to just read some of this stuff? So I said, sure, just email me the lines, and I did it and sent it to her, and she was so pleased with the quality of the audio that she started asking, well, how did you get that? So I helped her that way, understanding some of the technical side of what I was able to achieve. And so, and then I've gotten so many blips, as you put it, but I've seen my numbers rise from those kind of things, and that's really helpful.
Keep in mind, podcasters like nothing more than hearing the name of their show on somebody else's lips. So with Stuart, what he did was, by recording a liner, he's both promoting their show and his show immediately. When Merle Lafferty was releasing Playing for Keeps, I recorded this goofy thing as Schwarzenegger talking about, if you see anybody with superpowers, call her hotline number and report them. That was originally just going to be an Easter egg for inside the PDF. She liked it so much she used it as a promo. So I have no idea how many other shows that ended up going on. And there aren't a whole lot of people that even know it was me. I mean, I'm kind of known for doing the voice, but it wasn't Arnold Schwarzenegger. No, it was not actually Arnold Schwarzenegger. Surprisingly, it was me.
Yeah, you had me as a guest on Mr. Adventure at RavenCon doing a voiceover for a sponsorship of a fictitious product.
For sparkle water. Why, it's the only water available in a bottle. Keep in mind that Mr. Adventure takes place.
My necromancer drinks nothing but sparkle water.
Well, that's what Steve's doing today.
Yeah, Steve's going to be taking over now. Usually, if there's time, I like to tailor the sponsorship to where the person is able to promote themselves somehow in it. Because me personally, I know a shitload of really awesome, voice actors. People may not know them as voice actors because, like you, Stuart, you do a show that doesn't require voice acting. But you are awesome at it. And so I love having you on as Mr. Adventure. No, seriously, I'm serious about that. And there are some people like Stephen where I haven't, and Gail, that I haven't had a chance to have them on as a character. But I will try to put them in as a sponsor or something where they can just read it. Because, a lot of times I get the script just a few days before the con, don't have a whole lot of time to go through it, the formula and everything. But, which is why I was handing the scripts out today, because I just got them printed. I got them printed about 45 minutes ago. But yeah, for me, it's all about the collaboration. I mean, the reason why my name is known, and funny story, at DragonCon they have the Parsec Awards. And I was giving out the award for, I think it was the best fan caster. And I got up there and says, hi everybody, I'm Podcasting's Rich Sigfred. How many people before 5 seconds ago knew my name? I'd say about 75% of the hands went up in the room. I was very awesome. And how many of you are actually subscribing to any of my shows? I'd say maybe 20% were still raised. So to a certain degree, it's not necessarily even promoting your project, it's promoting you, and hopefully people will be interested in what you do. And that's a great way to be prolific in the podcast community, get your name out there. Hopefully people, like I said, will go and check your material out. It's just by providing voice work for other people. It's a lot of fun, It gives you experience, so when you go to do your own project, you'll be that much better at it. But
And for taglines and bumpers, it takes all of 10 seconds of your time. I mean, it really is nothing.
Well, and you know, another thing that comes out of this is relationships with the people that you get to know as guests, with the people that you get to know as a guest. And so whether you're an author, whether you're, you know, into creating fan fiction or fan video or whatever your claim to fame or hope for fame is, it's also a way of building that kind of community in terms of who are you connected to, who do you know, who have you done a favor for, who has done a favor for you. And now you also know who has knowledge about something, and you have a connection with them to come back and say, hey, I really like the way you did this, how did it work? And those connections come about from being active in the community.
Well, there's also a rule of promoting something that, you know, if you can get your name or the name of your product or whatever in as many places as you can so that a person hears it so many times, it'll get in their
7 to 30.
long-term memory. And here, proof of it, which this just cracks me up, our show, once a month we do our mailbag and whatever mail we've gotten throughout the month. And I have a relative in Israel named Abe who listens to our show. And he always writes something. And he's this very old Jewish guy who writes like an old Jewish guy. And it always cracks us up. And so we always just throw his at the end. And so every mailbag ends with us saying, and finally Abe from Israel writes, and whatever crazy thing he wrote.
I'm loving your show, Stuart.
And this has gone on for a couple of years, and he had to move and all this, and so there was like a 2-month period where he hadn't written anything. And I went to a con, and several people who listened to our show came up and said, what's going on with Abe? Is Abe all right? Why haven't we heard from Abe? And I'm like, you know, they've only heard him like maybe 12 times over the course of this year, and yet it's ingrained in their head that they don't even know who they're talking about. They want to hear from Abe. And so now that he's back, they're all excited again. Well, you said that.
So Abe now has a following on your podcast.
I think you said that your son really liked Mr. Adventure, and he was going around throwing the...
Okay, the one he loves that thing.
And when you hear that, it's really awesome, because you know then that you're connecting on some level with your fans. And so in a way, if your fans are connecting, then the hope is that they will go tell their friends, and they'll tell their friends, and their friends, and so on, until you own the world.
There's another strategy. Give yourself a dumb nickname tied to a pop culture icon.
There you go. I'm sorry, sir, that was not a question.
No, it wouldn't work as Indiana Steven, okay? But it's Indiana J with a J.
So what's your real name? Is it not Jim?
It is Jim.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant change it so it would fit.
He's only from Indiana.
It's not.
With regard to the communities thing, again, the more you work together, the tighter knit you become. A lot of us, at least within the fan audio sphere, have worked with each other to promote each other's things, done voice acting with each other all the time, incredibly incestuous, so to speak. But we also, I mean, we actually even had two of our community's voice actors who got to know each other in part through our community got married recently. So we are seeing the development of relationships. It's all connected. You can't separate. Yeah, you can't separate the community of podcasting versus the community of real life, because in a sense you're always dealing with just everyday people, and they want the same recognition as anyone else, and they want the same voice as anyone else. It is real life. And I do want to switch gears a little bit.
Actually, I just want to say one thing. I had heard, but I didn't know that was you guys. Congratulations, and also I hope your love doesn't pod fade.
Now, several have mentioned, and I've done this as well, doing a audio book, doing some type of reading of your fiction that you're trying to sell in other formats on a podcast. Do you find that is more of a help promotionally, or does it wind up that if you put your whole story out there in audiobook form, people think there's no need to buy it now? I mean, does it actually help from a promotional standpoint, or is that sort of a lie we tell ourselves?
I have one story I can say about that, and it's not from a audiobook, it's from an audiobook. I rented an audiobook of Grapes of Wrath, listened to the entire unabridged book, And then when I went to a bookstore, felt compelled to buy the physical book. I don't know why. Knowing I would never open the book, I had no messaging.
Well,
Yeah, so I mean, it sort of relates to what you're talking about. But, and so I did buy the book.
Well, I did the same thing with Brad Meltzer's, I picked up a Brad Meltzer legal drama audiobook and then literally read the novel about a year later because I wanted to experience it again. So I can see that connection, sure.
I think, you know, one of the success stories that's out there right now is a guy named J.C. Hutchins who wrote Seventh Son. And his audio books got so many thousands of downloads, he was able to snag a traditional publisher by saying, look, I've got an established audience and it's a sizable audience. So now his books are coming out traditionally published. He's got a second series coming out, Personal Effects, Dark Arts. He's had interest from movies. So, and now his promotion is coming around full circle, doing a new program called Seventh Son Obsidian, where he had a sizable number of other short story writers, both professionals and talented fans, contribute to writing stories about something that happened in world, and he's releasing that as both, I think, audio and written. So, you know, there's a success story, somebody who was very ingenious in using the medium and
Here's
has
a question
succeeded
about
with
that,
it.
though, because he's one that cited that Scott Sigler is the other big
Yeah,
name.
he's
Also,
Scott Sigler.
those are the two that got
T. Morris as well.
But
And T.
well, but I mean, Scott
Or
and J.C. Hutchins
Yeah.
parlayed into big name, big publishing.
As opposed to
As
the
opposed to
small
press.
press kind of
Yeah.
Okay.
But the thing I always wonder when I hear about them is that I wonder if it's something that could be duplicated now, or if it was a timing thing, just like a lot of us, you know, they started so many years ago when there weren't those things out there, so they were able to nab the listeners because there was nothing else like it to listen to.
So you're thinking it might be a saturated market now?
I don't know. I'm just curious if whether that kind of success could happen again, or if it's just
first,
I don't know.
it gives you opportunities
Right,
that
that
mean
others
second.
don't.
Well, yeah, and actually, I think that with what you're saying, like there are shows out there like The Signal that you know, they filled a void, which is why they got to be so popular so quickly. And when it comes to guys like, you know, Hutch, T. Sigler, I'm really curious to find out if in 5 to 10 years, if they're still having as much popularity with their book sales. Because is it something where the community is supporting somebody who's finally risen from the ranks and maybe gotten into that market, or is it that, you know, the work itself is really that good? And I'm not busting their chops. I'm not saying that their stuff's bad. I'm just saying that these were the first ones to do it. So were we as a community supporting them by buying their material? Matt Loss is another fellow that definitely falls in that camp. Is it because those stories are so good we want to read it with our eyes instead of just listening with our ears? Or
I
is
can't
it?
answer that, but I have a comment about what you were just saying. Being early meant that there was sort of a vacuum and that they were filling it. But we're reaching a point now where cell phones, you can now download directly into a cell phone and use it as your MP3 player, which means you can reach more of a mainstream audience that's blossoming that didn't exist then, when you had to download your shows through a computer.
I would actually disagree with that, because until it is simple enough that it works the same way as a radio or a television,
Well, it's not,
that's when it's that simple.
It's
Yeah,
coming very
that's when it's
soon.
not going to go full mainstream.
my own experience with this for our show, we got onto iTunes and we put ourselves in one of the science categories. And at that time, I remember going on and we were in the top 25 of science. And we weren't getting that many listeners. I mean,
That's good.
but back then, I mean, you know, I think we had hit 100 listeners, you know. And I'm like, okay, so we're in the top 25, which made me feel really good. But I also was realistic and realized, well, there just aren't that many people out there listening. Well, now we're still in the top 100, but we vacillate between like 50 and 75, depending on where we are in the week, because we're fighting now with NPR, with, you know, Discover Magazine has their own podcast, and all these that have, you know, probably hundreds of thousands of listeners. So that's what I'm saying, is that for a while there, if you turn on your front page on iTunes in the science section, we were there, and we can't possibly get there now because of who we have to compete with.
Well, and that's not
Rich
original
spoke-
content, that's repurposed content
Right,
from
for
it.
them, yeah.
So they're just taking the stuff that they recorded on the radio and dropping it on the internet.
When Rich and I started, we were both in the top 5. Of course, when you and I started, there were 5.
I was ranked number 6, what the hell?
That's because you got in before
Yeah.
the RSS.
Yeah, before the RSS feeds and that sort of thing. We are, and that is one thing that is an issue you guys bring up, that you have all these, I mean, podcasters oftentimes are referred to as amateur, no matter how professional they are, because they're podcasting by themselves instead of for some big corporation. But you do have podcast feeds for, you know, radio, like radio shows, talk radio programs have their podcast feeds. Different corporations, I think it was Popular Mechanics, I think, has a podcast out. Now we are seeing a definite shift. It went from, like from my perspective, there's a lot of amateur audio put out on the internet to podcasting growing to, holy crap, this could be a good way to reach new listeners or new audiences, so the corporations jump in on it. Has that been a boom or a boon when it comes to promoting podcasting in general? Are the corporations making it more difficult, or have the corporations raised the visibility?
Well, I like to use the term independent created, because amateur does have a certain
That's
stigma.
true.
So I like to use the term independent and then you have corporate.
Indie.
Yeah, yes, Indiana.
Thank you.
I personally think that the corporate stuff is good because it gets the visibility out. Because let's face it, we can't afford to put a commercial on there. We can't afford to get on their websites. But if they say podcast, the term itself is becoming a little bit more mainstream, where people are more comfortable with it. Exactly. It's going to get credibility, yes, but mainly just availability, the term itself, into people's minds that may not know it exists. Most people, I know when I first started, I didn't get into podcasting for a while, because I knew about it for about 6 months before I started releasing the show. Because I heard the term podcast, and I was like, well, I need an iPod for it, and there's probably some magical way that it gets onto it, and I don't have one, so I don't know how to do it.
Still here.
And yeah, but then I started to think about it. I was like, wait, that makes no sense whatsoever. Let me actually research it. And with with so many churches, and I think honestly, this is one of the biggest ways that's helping the term get spread out. Are churches. A lot of churches now, since they've always recorded their sermons and stuff like that, they're like, oh, wait a second, we can put a podcast. There are a lot of churches that you can drive by. They've got their marquee out there and says, listen to us on the internet.
Universities are doing that too.
Universities are doing that.
Podcasting their lectures.
Well, I've taught at UNC Charlotte for the last 6 years, and I know a lot of other professors who go, look, it's your money that you're paying for these credit hours. I personally don't care whether you come to class physically or whether you download the lectures and listen to them on the beach somewhere. But at the end of the semester, you're responsible for the content. So I think that's also, has widened the number of people who have experienced the idea and the process of podcasting, because, okay, they may first be almost required to do it for a class, but once they find out how to do it, and gee, there's other stuff out there that can be fun, then people that might not have gone looking for it themselves now have the skills and the understanding, and they know where to find it. Now they start finding other stuff.
And that's where a lot of the cross-promotional stuff we talked about, or as I was talking about doing taglines, because they're going to get out there, and if they find that one show, it'll lead them to your show. And before I forget, the other thing that I found has really helped us early on was when we would come to cons like this, and I would make little freebie flyers for the freebie table for our show. And I'll never forget, I went to WorldCon in Los Angeles. Yeah, and I made like 100 of them.
I did these last
For WorldCon, because I figured, well, there's 4,000 people there. Maybe the odds are, I'll get 20 or 30 of them. And they were all gone. And I watched within the next few weeks the numbers on our show rose. And they settled down too, because there were a lot of people who didn't like what they heard, but we kept a lot. That very non-technical way of promoting yourself is always good.
Well, yeah, and absolutely. When it comes to promotion, I'm going to pass these out.
Which is why you can find the eclectic review at eclectic.libsyn.com.
Question, yes, sir?
Take a look at some.
Yes, I know y'all are talking about promoting, for example, your work, whatever kind of podcast, and I love the idea for my business as well. But is there any way, I haven't heard anybody actually talk about making money from their podcast.
Right. Everybody tries, and very few succeed.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation because you've got you have to have a way to control access to it. Where if they pay for it, they can get access. Now, if you do
if you're trying to get them to pay.
yeah, if you're trying to pay for the item itself, but you could use it as a vehicle. I mean, it's again, as Rick said, it's just a distribution method. You know, it's equivalent to a radio commercial. It's equivalent to a television commercial. It's just a question of which audience are you trying to reach. In my case, I do some podcasts I teach and I do podcasts as study guides for my students because to me, what I'm trying to reach is that student group, that student body. But you can make money off of it just like you can with any other tool. It's a question of what creative way you can do to work the money into the situation. Getting the message out there, getting the podcast out is the easy part.
Now, if you want to make money directly from the podcast, and it's nobody, for the most part, is making a huge amount of money, especially when you realize that the average listenership, you said, is 250. If you want
that's an even lower tier.
So it's even less. But you can either do the legwork yourself, or there are networks you can join where they try and pool all, 100 of those shows that have 250 people and go to get advertising for the shows. But they don't make a lot of money. The only real money success story I know of is Minion Fogarty, who was doing a science podcast for a long time, got bored with it, wanted to do something short and quick, and decided, well, she, for a living, was doing editing for science articles. And she said, I'm so sick of seeing all these grammar mistakes. So I'm going to take 6 minutes, do a little, explain a grammar thing, I before E, except after C, or whatever it is, and do it in little 6-minute bits, and whoever wants to listen to it can listen to it. And she called herself the Grammar Girl. Well, this thing, teachers found out about it, bosses started requiring their people to listen to it because it was short and it took care of all these little things. And it just exploded. She ended up doing a local TV thing. That got noticed by somebody who worked at Oprah. She was on Oprah. She got a book deal, and and now she has a whole network of different types of 6-minute bits like that. But talk about promotion. She was part of the podcast Pickle Group back then. And she was like, I don't understand this. She goes, the only promotion she did was to tell us at Podcasters Pickle, by the way, I'm doing this. Listen and tell me if the sound's okay. That was it. She didn't do anything else. It did its own thing.
She has a funny nickname.
Go figure.
Now, I did want to pass those out just as an example. These are from last weekend. They're from BaltCon. So unfortunately, where it says Sunday 12 noon, mainly because, it is Saturday 12 noon right now. But the thing is that this is something that is eye-catching. This is something you can just drop on a freebie table, and you see it, and you're like, hey, what's that? Whether it's this side or this side, you've caught somebody's attention, and you want to see what it is. That is one of the best ways. It's like having a groovy business card that people will, when they empty their pockets, they put it down, they'll remember how cool it was. They may not remember anything about it, what you look like, who you were, or anything like that, but they'll see something that's eye-catching and want to investigate more. And that's how you really use a free table. But I wanted to pass those out. Let's go to the website.
And I think it comes back to your goals of doing the podcast, because you can have a goal of creating a podcast audience and owning a listenership, just like a TV show buys for audience. Or you can have a goal of creating exposure for your books and the books of people that you've gotten to know. Or you can create a podcast for helping other people get a small business off the ground. So it all depends on what your personal goals are, and not all of those goals are around monetizing the podcast itself. Now, if somebody listens to the, one of my Ghost in the Machine podcasts and decides that, hey, I'll check out the book from that lady who was on the podcast, or I'll check out the book for the friend of hers that was on the podcast, okay, in a way, we monetize that because we may have sold a book because of that. But the podcast, just like it is a distribution method, is often also a means to an end, not an end itself.
Can I have something real quick? We're talking about doing taglines and bumpers and stuff for other people. I was curious, what is kind of the etiquette with respect to that?
You mean how do you go about getting to do that?
When you're starting to get in,
or if it's such,
Generally trade, isn't it? Usually it's occasionally, you run one of ours, we'll run one of yours at least to start with?
That can happen. I'm sure there are still some active podcasting forums out there. I ended up initially doing it because people would come onto the Pickle or whatever and say, look, I'm looking for a bunch of these to do, if you'd like to do it. Or I have a show, and so people sometimes will write me and say, would you be willing to do that? And then as far as it goes, everyone's very humble about it, at least that I dealt with, where it's like I record it and I'd say, look, if you don't want to use it, this is what I came up with, is that okay? Everyone's, I don't know, it's more of a very friendly kind of thing. So it's not like you have to master a query letter or something in order to get it, And you can even email people and say, who shows you like, and say, look, I'm doing a show, would you like me to do this? Would you be, particularly shows that are already doing it. For example, that show just went out of my head. Shortcomings Audio, which is one of my favorite little quick audio things, and he and I, Kevin Cummings, the guy who does it, have been friends for a while. I haven't actually listened to his show in a long time because I've been real busy. And I downloaded it the other day, and he just started doing this, having people do tags. And he used to never do that. So I'll email and say, would you want me to do this? But he's a perfect one that, he's just doing it for anybody. He's not like filtering through saying, oh, not you.
Do you need there to be a reasonable expectation that they've heard of you before you send them anything?
Not necessarily. I don't think so.
No, usually they'll be flattered that you like their show.
Yeah, and you can say that, I listened, but they may have only listened to 5 seconds of one episode.
There are so many podcasts, nobody's heard of them all. So that they haven't heard of it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
We need to be wrapping up. Any final comments we want to make, or are we pretty solid on this topic and we're ready to move on to whatever the next might be?
If you do a podcast and you want to promote it, make sure you have plenty of keywords on your website or your blog, like describing your show and stuff, so that people who are searching the internet will stumble across your show.
And I would say the other thing is take advantage of the widgets and the applications on Facebook and MySpace and all of those places to auto-load, use RSS to add your content every time you add a new podcast, and Twitter every time you have a new episode. Let people know, got a new episode up, and include the URL.
But keep in mind, if you're a social media whore with it, which there's nothing wrong with being that, make sure you're also using those as social networking. Don't just promote yourself, because then you're a spammer. And what's going to make people want to stick around to hear what your next release is going to be.
Oh, okay.
I know, it's something I always forget to do. Because it's like Twitter, I just ate a sandwich. But listen to my new episode that's coming out soon.
Well, we need to get rolling so that Rich can have time to Twitter real quick before starting Mr. Adventure. The live Mr. Adventure is happening where?
Here in 10 minutes.
Okay. That's a win, not a where. Here
Okay, that's this room in about 10 minutes.
Live audio drama.
Yes, and let's hear. I've got Stuart and Stephen. They're going to be acting on it. We've also got Indiana Jim and the folks in the back with Joe, Sarah, and
Andrew.
Andrew. I was thinking Albert for some reason. Gilbert's
in a can.
And those guys back there.
Thank you, everyone.
So yeah, we'd love to have you guys stick around. And really quickly, if we want to nail all of our URLs.
Sure. StarWarsFanWorks.com for me.
Goes to themachinepodcast.com.
Thefutureindyou.com.
Eclectic reviews at eclectic.libsyn.com.
And everything is at outcastmultimedia.com. Thank you guys for coming out. Appreciate it.